Hi everyone, David Aragona and Ashley Mailloux here to talk some Pick 5 strategy at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. It's their marquee day, Tampa Bay Derby Day, and we're going to talk about that Pick 5 sequence that is culminating with race 11, the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby. We got 4 stakes in this sequence, Ashley. One non-stakes event, that's a tricky one to figure out, that's race 8, but this does go from race 7 through 11, ending with that Tampa Bay Derby. Before we get into the handicapping, though, I want to make people aware that we do have this bundle being offered currently on shop.drf.com. If you're somebody who really gears up for the Derby season and purchases all of these individual cards for Derby prep races as well as for the Oaks and the Derby, purchase them all at once. All of these major Derby preps coming up, you get the full cards for each of them as well as Oaks and Derby along with clock reports, betting strategies, and more. So check out more information about that on shop.drf.com. And Ashley, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. This is not the easiest sequence to figure out because we do have plenty of Chad Brown runners and others that figure to take a lot of money in these races, but hard to really narrow it down because they're pretty competitive affairs.
It is. And I think when we talk about strategy, I like to give a strategy that's something that I would play, right? I have to think about my budget and how I would structure this. I feel like that's being truthful. And I feel like I had to make some hard stands in some of these races just because there are 2, 3 horses and on paper, they look like they're the main 2 or 3, but I also like prices, right? And just a ticket that in terms of pick 5, even when you sort of look at this kind of key use defend angle, would be out of budget. So you'll see throughout, David, I had to make some tough calls.
Yeah, and as Ashley is suggesting, we're starting this new format using our key, use, and defend horses rather than just giving out picks in these races or giving out one single ticket to start thinking a little bit more about playing multiple tickets. How you separate horses that you like more than those that you want to use sparingly or more defensively. So we'll talk about those and how we're separating them in each race as we go through this sequence. Let's kick things off with race 7. It's the Columbia Stakes, this one for the 3-year-olds going 1 mile on the turf. And we faced with one of those situations that we get at Tampa where we've got a couple of Chad Brown horses. He has a strong presence throughout this card, and there are 2 of them in this race. The one that does figure to take a lot of money is the morning line favorite, the number 6 Zulu Kingdom. And I wonder what your take on this horse is, Ashley, as we can go to your grid first, because he did everything right up until the Breeders' Cup as a 2-year-old, but I was a little disappointed in that performance, and I'm wondering what we're going to get from him in his 3-year-old debut.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see my kind of picks here in terms of key use defense. So he does make the use category. He does not make the key for me. I actually went price shopping elsewhere. I actually really like the inside early adopter, who I think from a figure standpoint, he really does need to take a step forward, but he's done such little wrong in his career. I think he has the versatility. I like where he draws in here. I just think he has upside. I mean, you talked about Zulu Kingdom. I know he was technically third and well defeated, but he had a ton of trouble in the Pilgrim. So I'm willing to forgive that performance. He came back with a nice third place effort. So I like the upside on him and just knowing Chad Brown with those runners in general. I can't toss Chad here. And I know obviously he has Zulu Kingdom as well. The other price for me is on the outside Dream On, who I'll be honest, I've doubted at different points what he really wants to do in terms of distance. And just to see him last time out at Gulfstream Park at the mile and a 16th. I thought he ran very well. We can see that he can be forward from the gate. He might have to with this post, David, but he's going to offer more value than the 4 and the 6 in here. And you mentioned Zulu Kingdom. I was really disappointed last time out, but just knowing it's Chad, knowing that he's able to get these horses back to their former shape so quickly, I'm not really concerned about it. They've regrouped just like they did with the other horse in here to give them the time off. And he's just not going to offer value, but you can't really toss him in my opinion, because if he wins, he could easily win by 5 lengths in here. My opinion here that maybe is different than a lot is Reagan's Wit, who is a short price on the morning line, is 3-1. I don't necessarily love this horse. I know the performance last time out comes very impressive. A lot of those horses that exit that race, they came back to at least run well and take a step forward. But I think this is a big sort of test for class, even with these other runners having the stakes competition under their belt. I wonder about Trip. The debut, I actually liked the Trip better in the sense that I really don't know what this horse beat last time out and circled most of the field and is going to get tested. And just a short price in here that I'm scared by this horse. That's why we have it in the defense sort of situation here. But I am not sold on Reagan's Wit just on that 182 buyer.
Yeah, and as we transition to my grid, we can see I'm kind of flip-flopping the way that you viewed this race, Ashley, as I'm going to put those Chad Brown horses both in the defend category. I personally don't love either one of them. I'm always scared of Chad in these situations, and if I get a price home later in this sequence, I don't want my ticket to be dead right away if one of them wins, and I can still be alive to my stronger opinions later on. But Zula Kingdom, for all the reasons you said, I was left cold by that last performance. He's not going to offer value. An early adopter, I do think he's the better price of the two of them. I just wanted to see him get there last time against what I thought was a slightly weaker field than this, so I think he's going to have to improve a little bit. I took more of the positive stance on the number 4, Reagan's Wit, that you were just talking about. I mean, he ran a really fast race last time at Fairgrounds, and I know he wasn't beating the strongest field, but when you win a turf race by 8 lengths, I don't care so much who's behind you, because you just don't see horses put in performances that are that dominant on the turf very often. And the runner-up did come back to win. He was 99-1 when Reagan's Wit beat him, and he came back to win his next race at 18-1. So I think even the bettors were doubting the quality of the field that was behind him that day. This horse has to prove it against way tougher company here, but I do think he's got the late kick that could really produce a nice finish here. And it does seem like there's some pace in this race. And the other horse that I wanted to upgrade to the key slot was the number 8 Revolutionaire, who is making his first start in the United States and first start for the Christophe Clement barn. He's stepping up in company here and also stepping up in trip after having sprinted over in France through his first 6 starts. But watching some of those races, I like the way he finishes. He seems like he's a pretty gritty horse who fights it out in traffic. And he faced some good rivals last time in that Group 3 event. The top 2 finishers, they came back to finish 6th and 7th in a Group 1 next time, but they were 6th and 7th right behind Henri Matisse, who was 5th in that race. And we know that horse, he came back to win the Breeders' Cup. So maybe those form lines are pretty strong for Revolutionaire. And he's one that I think might get a little overlooked going out for Clement in a race where the 2 Chad Brown runners do, or at least one of them does figure to take a decent amount of money. We covered that Columbia pretty comprehensively, Ashley. So let's move on to the next leg. And this is the one non-stakes event in this sequence, and a tough one to get through, because you see it's a 13-horse field. You can tell from the morning line, it's a pretty competitive affair. Lukewarm 3-1 morning line favorite on the number 12 Laser Sharp. I would imagine the number 11 Silver Slugger also likely to take money in this race. And Ashley, when I was going through this one, I see a lot of pace in here. I mean, I was looking at the Timeform US pace projector. No surprise, there's a fast pace predicted. It's just hard to find the right horse that's going to trip out, given how chaotic it's going to be on the front end.
It's going to be chaotic, and it's kind of interesting. You mentioned some of the speed in here. Dither, the 7 has speed. You can go more towards the outside. The 11 and the 12, they can show speed as well. And Silver Slugger didn't do that last time this one ran. Had a ton of trouble from the gate. So I have to think with a sharper break, this horse could be in the mix. And I just wonder who it sets up for. And that's why I found maybe some prices a little intriguing, one in particular. And for me, that's the 8 Osprey, which I don't think will actually get 10-1. I think this is going to be a sneaky horse. It's going to take respect, but I don't think will be the price that the other horses I mentioned will be in this spot. And I think the main thought process here is, okay, I know the effort last time out, pretty bad. Didn't take a lot of 11 there, but it just wasn't the right effort. And you look at how the race shaped up, it didn't work out for him. But he goes back to his former connections. And when I look at those races, 2 and 4 and 5 starts back where there is pace in front of him, I think the pace could be quicker. And I wonder if he'll be able to close. As I mentioned, I think he's 10-1 on the morning line. He's some value in here. I also really think a key horse in here will be the 12, who, when you look at Laser Sharp in maybe contrast to some of his others, he's forward, but he's not the lead sort of type. He doesn't need to be, leading at the quarter, leading at the half. He can make a late charge. And I think on paper, for me at least, I actually think he's the one to beat. When I looked at the use, Silver Slugger, that was a tough spot to put this horse in the Pelican last time out. Coming out of an $8,000 claiming event, you can see has had setbacks, has had things go on, but he is very fast from the gate. Those wins were pretty impressive despite the levels. And I do think this is a realistic spot to put him, David. This is the spot that he can show up. He can be effective. And then, I didn't know what to do with the 7. And I thought about defending the 7. And I looked at the 7 more. And there are just certain things I don't necessarily love about this runner. So for me, I'm just not going to use it all and just kind of really focus on the 8 and the 12, and then also use the 11.
Yeah, I think we broke things down pretty similarly in this race. I'm just spreading a little bit more than you are. That's the main difference, because we've got the exact same horses in the key and use categories here. And I'm going to echo everything you said about Osprey. I'll maybe even add, I wonder if the trainer was serving a suspension for his last race. I wasn't able to figure that out, but I noticed the trainer didn't start any horses for a 3-week period. So he's going back into the barn of the one that he had success with in the past. So that's a good sign for Osprey. And I agree with everything you said about Laser Sharp. He's just very logical. And yeah, I also down downgraded Silver Slugger slightly to the used category because I just feel like he's going to take money off that the common line with horses like Nutella Fella and Caramel Chip last time. Just way better horses than this. That might pull some money in his direction, but he's not exactly a standout on speed figures. And he's one that is going to be trying to work out a trip close to what could be a hot pace. The one horse that I did add to the key category that might be one of the better prices of those that I'm using is the number 7 Dither that you just mentioned. You were kind of toying whether or not to include him on your ticket. He really improved last time off the claim for this new barn that I'm not that familiar with, but it seems like they're having a lot of success at this current Tampa Bay Downs meet. And this horse took a big step forward, and you kind of wonder where it came from. But then you go through his prior races and start to separate out the turf races from the dirt races. And yeah, he's 3 for 17 in his career, but he's 3 for 7 on the dirt. And he just spent a long time running on the turf, which it doesn't seem like he likes at all. And now that he's getting some consistent dirt performances into him, he's really improving. He's going to have to work out some trip on the front end, and it's going to be difficult to do so. And that's one reason why I downgraded a horse like the number 5 Iya, who I was trying to make a case for because he's so gritty and likes to fight it out on the front end, and he'll be a price. Just tough to see a horse like that who needs to be in front surviving the pace. So that's a reason why I threw a horse like the number 6 Take Charge Smiling in there, hoping that maybe he's one that could work out a stalking trip and pick up the pieces. But as you can see, I've got 6 horses up there that I'm using in different categories. For me, this was a spread race.
Yeah, it's definitely tough too when we talked about the sequence. It's the non-stake in there, and it doesn't come up light in terms of entry. So totally understand your thought process there, spreading.
Let's move back into the stakes portion of this sequence on to race 9, the grade 2 Hillsborough. This one going the 1.125 distance on the turf for the fillies and mares. And Chad Brown's got a strong presence in this one, actually sending out 3 runners, including the morning line favorite, the number 8 Saffron Moon, who of course is the mount of Flavian Pratt. No surprise when that duo takes a lot of money. And she's coming off a big victory last time in the Endeavor, the local prep for this, which I thought was really impressive. It was probably a slightly weaker field than the one that she's meeting here, but she never saw the rail in that race. She traveled too wide every step of the way. And once Flavian steered her into the clear at the top of the stretch, she settled that race very quickly. So it was an impressive performance. The only problem is now that she's got that totally exposed form, I don't know if we're going to get much of a price on her.
We're not. And that's why when you kind of think about this key use angle, where do you put her? I think she is a horse that you have to use, but I do think she is the horse to beat. And that's why, unfortunately, I do put her in the key in here, but I also use a price. And this price is probably a hot take. A lot of people probably won't use her. Sparkle Blue is my price in here. She's 8-1 on the morning line. And I know her last few, those last 2 have not been good. But Kentucky Downs, I'll draw a line through. She obviously went to the sidelines after the Dance Smartly up at Woodbine on the EP Taylor. And it's when I go through her form, it's not going to be the same Hillsborough that she saw a year ago where no one wanted the lead. She found the lead and she won. I mean, they went so slow in there. It's not even funny how slow they went, and she was able to win. But I think as I went through her races prior to that, she can be a little versatile. She can be closer to it. She can be further off of it. And depending what the tactics of others are in here, I don't know your thoughts. I don't feel like there's a ton of speed in this race. I don't think that there's going to be a very, very hot, wicked tempo in here. And maybe she does find herself a little bit more forward. She has the inside draw. And I just know she's not going to take love in here. And I think there are things that you can dig up in her form that make her attractive, especially at a price. So those were the 2 that I thought were really my keys. Out of the Chads, if we mentioned there's 3, I have a tough time using all 3 Chads just from knowing there are other horses I like and having to make a stand. And out of the other 2, Spaladay and Venetia, I prefer Spaladay based on what we've seen to this point. Obviously, she's a multiple stakes winner at this point. She got the win last time out in the grade 2 race, and she needs pace help, which does maybe work against her a little bit, but I do think she has the class to carry her here. I do think she's also been training very well. So for me, I will use her in this race. And then for me, the defend horse is the South African mare for Graham Motion. Give me another. And the fact that when we look at Graham's success, South African runners have been a little bit new to his barn stay in the last year, but Beach Bomb has done very well. Izzy Vungavunga is the other horse that he's done well with. He's been able to get them ready to roll in that first start. And she obviously has a very impressive resume. She's undefeated in her career. And I'm curious to see how she will be bet, knowing that she's making her first start stateside, David. But she's scary to me, but I don't know if I love her enough compared to some of the others.
Yeah, and I like what you're doing here, putting a horse like Sparkle Blue as your key horse, because the point of this exercise is to maybe not think about who's the most likely winner, but try to get that horse that's going to be a price to add value to the sequence. And when you put that horse in the key slot and use it with a lot of other horses in the surrounding legs, it gives yourself a chance to actually be successful with a horse with a winning sequence that's going to pay out nicely. So I couldn't quite get there with Sparkle Blue, but I hear the points that you're making, and she is going to be a price in this race. I put the number 8 Saffron Moon in the use category because I do think she is the most likely winner. I just don't see her offering any value in here. And for me, that's just like the quintessential use horse, a horse that I think I want to have on my tickets and I want to use in other with other strong opinions that I have in surrounding legs, but not a horse that I want all of my money to go through because I don't see the value coming there. The horse that I upgraded to be my only key in this race is the number 9 Eternal Silence. And she has a tall task ahead of her because she's coming off the layoff, facing the toughest field that she's met in over a year because she only participated once in the past year. And obviously, this Christophe Clement trainee has had some trouble staying on the racetrack, and that's maybe a slight concern. But she did show real talent going all the way back to the early part of her career. When you look at that Moigler stud when she was a 2-year-old, where she was third behind Tahira and Meditate, who were the 2 best fillies in that crop over in Ireland. And yes, her form fell apart a little bit as a 3-year-old, but I really liked that return last summer against a weaker field than this at Aqueduct, but she won that race pretty convincingly, and she beat some good horses, including Mrs. Astor, who went on to win stakes later in the year. She's coming off the layoff, but I like the confident placement here by Christophe Clement. I've watched a couple of her recent workouts. It seems like she's really doing well coming into this race, so I'm hoping that she can maybe catch some people by surprise at a price in here off the layoff. We'll see if that's the case. And I kind of had the same difficulty as you about deciding where to put the number 7, Give Me Another, because she is such a wild card at this race. And I think she's shown real talent overseas, but it's tough to have success coming to a different hemisphere and first off the layoff. Grand Motion does do well with these, as you pointed out, but I feel like she's going to take some money in here, especially with Irad Ortiz hopping aboard. So I wanted to downgrade her a little bit. And I hear the point that you're making about a lack of pace in this race. That's why I put the number 10 Damaso in the defend category, because she's going to be a big price and she could be leading these for a long time up towards the front end. Let's move on to another stakes event and stick on the turf course. It's race 10. That is the grade 3 Florida Oaks. This one for the 3-year-old fillies. And as you can see, a large field here, 12 signed on. And the number 9 Nitrogen does feel like clearly the one to beat, Ashley, just based on her last couple of performances. I know it took her 4 tries to break her maiden, but she did so in a stakes race. And prior to earning that first victory, she had finished 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf behind the very talented Lake Victoria. And going back to watch that race, there's an argument she could have been even closer at the end if Jose Ortiz had been able to negotiate some of that traffic and find a path for her a little bit sooner, because she was absolutely flying at the end of that Breeders' Cup. And we saw that same flourish of a finish last time in the Ginger Brew. So she just seems like she's in razor sharp form right now.
She does. And this is a field where I think there are a lot of talented fillies, but I wonder if they're going to be battling for the minors. And so when you look at the key use defend for me, she is the key. I do think she is the horse to beat. I love what she's been able to do, and has been able to overcome things in some of those races as well. And you look at Woodbine, and she's been on the inner, she's been on the EP Taylor, very different, going from 2 turns to 1 turn. Then she gets to Delmar, then goes to Gulfstream. She just shows up every single time. So for me, she is the key, the only key. The use, I do think, is Opulent Restraint for Chad Brown. Obviously, she's been able to step it up. We haven't seen her as a 3-year-old filly, but as a 2-year-old filly, I thought she was pretty impressive the way that she was able to win both of her efforts, especially the Chelsea Flower. And then I mentioned there's horses that I really like. They're going to be prices I don't know if they can win, and they're going to be big prices. One of them is Smart Union on the inside. Her figures are pretty soft, David, when you look at her compared to the other runners in the field. But I really like what she's been able to do. I like the win at Tampa, which came in January. Then they brought her back to Gulfstream next time out. She was able to win again. She didn't show the progression necessarily that I would need to maybe use her a little bit higher, but I do think there is upside on her. You're going to get a good price. Danny Centeno is familiar with her with that win at Tampa 2 back. And the other one is Deloraine. Deloraine has been able to literally run on anything at this point in her career. If you draw a line through the debut, I think there's a lot to like. Suncoast, she's 3rd. She's well defeated, but Lacara put on a spectacle, went to the front, was benefited by the fact that her laugh missed the break, and her laugh ran very well in that field to finish 2nd. And kind of looking at her, she was the best of the rest in there. I think she's intriguing getting back on the grass. Her turf win, not the figure, but the way she did it was very impressive 2 back.
Yeah, I think there are some interesting horses at prices in this race. And you highlighted too that I do not have anywhere on my grid the number one and the number three, but you can start to make cases for a lot of these horses in here. But kind of like you, as I was handicapping this race, I just kept coming back to those replays of Nitrogen and reminding myself that she's been so impressive against better competition than this. She just feels like she's way more likely to win this race than anybody else. So while I toyed with the idea of upgrading some prices to the key slot, I ultimately downgraded them and just made Nitrogen the one key horse in here. Don't think she's going to be great value, but I mean, she's 5-2 on the morning line. That's a very fair price on her, in my opinion. I think that she's more likely to win the race than that because there does seem like there's some pace in here, and she's likely to get the right kind of setup in this race. So for me, she is the only key. The two horses that I did want to use most prominently as backups are the two Briante, who's going out for the Chad Brown barn. A horse that I thought just made a really impressive run when she broke her maiden last time, starting at the half mile pole. You don't often see horses commence rallies leaving the backstretch, but she moved early and then sustained it all the way through the wire to pull away from those horses. Again, facing a way tougher field here, but I thought she showed some promise in that race. And then the other Mark Casse horse, the number 8 Smudge, I know she hasn't run that fast yet, but she has gotten difficult trips in each of her last two starts. She has been extremely wide on each occasion, particularly two back in the lone turf race. I mean, she was out in the 4 to 5 path all the way around the far turn that day. And then last time she made a really early move in that synth race and still was able to hold on at the end. She probably doesn't have the same expectations as her stablemate Nitrogen does, going out for the same ownership and trainer group. But I do think she's going to offer a lot more value than that rival. And she's one that I do want to include. And one more horse that I'll mention that I ultimately begrudgingly downgraded to the defend category is the number 5 Love You Anyway, who has a lot to prove as a maiden coming into this race. But that's a trip you might want to go back to watch if you're handicapping this race in Formulator or Timeform US. Pull up that entire replay because she had trouble on almost every stage of that race. Carried out early, wide on the far turn. She ran really well despite losing that race, and we'll see. It's an ambitious spot for her to make her second career start. But Ashley, I think we ultimately ended up leaning in the same direction here with the number 9 Nitrogen. Let's move on to the last leg of this sequence, race 11, closing things out with the grade 3 Tampa Bay Derby. This one at the mile and the 16th distance, of course, offering Kentucky Derby qualifying points. And really intriguing group here, Ashley, because it's a field of 7 runners, some familiar names among them, especially from last year, but they're all coming in with something significant to prove, whether it be distance or layoffs. They all have to show that they really belong on this Kentucky Derby trail moving forward.
And it even includes the 2 horses that are at the lowest prices on the morning line. Chancer McPatrick, who had an ankle procedure and has had time off. And then Patch Adams, who I know this horse got bumped around a little bit in the Southwest, but I think it's hard to make a strong case to say that's what cost him a placing in the top 3, knowing that Sandman was able to close from off of it, miss the break completely and finish second. So they both have things that they need to prove. I think the other thing to note in here, I'm kind of curious to get your opinion. I feel like there's a lot of speed in here. And if you go back to the Sam F. Davis and you look at Owen Almighty, John Hancock, speed was able to hold. The only real closer was Poster, who was able to rally from off of it. But I wonder in this race, is there a little bit more speed? And if that's the case, how this race will really play out. It's only a field of 7, but I think it could be a very good race.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out on the front end because you've got a horse in here that I think is a little tough to make as a winner in the number 4 Brodeur, but it seems like his only successful chance is to go to the front end and try to bottom out this field for trader Mark Casse, who does have a lot of live runners on this Saturday card. So we'll see if that's the case with him. But that could put horses like Owen Almighty and Patch Adams into a stalking position early. Let's go with your grid first, Ashley, and take a look at where you're going to lean in here. And we got these 2 Chad Brown runners in the race. You're going to go with the number 2 Chancer McPatrick, who's trying to prove that Breeders' Cup Juvenile was the aberration and get back on track here.
And I'll be honest, I didn't like him in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So for me to go back to him now, we've mentioned he has had some time off. He did have a minor issue. I think a couple of things. I love the Champagne performance from him. He did go a little bit wide, ends up drawing clear, and is able to catch Tip Top Thomas in that race. But I also like the equipment change. Some people don't like that for the big dance. Why are you putting blinkers on? I think he needs blinkers. He's going to need to be a little bit closer. I think with the inside draw, the equipment, he'll be ready to roll. Obviously, Flavian is staying with him. There's just so much upside on him. And I also think the fact that he's going to get the right trip. Now, you mentioned Hill Road. I don't know what to do with him. He'll come to my defend. We'll talk about him a little bit later. I think for me, the used horse is Patch Adams. I'm afraid of Patch Adams. I do think he's got a big shot in here. I didn't love his Southwest. but he was obviously heavily backed in there. I think when you look at the way he broke his maiden, you can see there's some serious racehorse there. He draws the outside in here. You mentioned it too, David. He could be stalking. He could be in that perfect pouncing position to make a move. So he is the use. The defend, that comes to Hill Road and Brodeur. I don't know what to do with Hill Road. Obviously, he was not supported in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, coming out of 2 turf races, stretching out to a mile and a 16th, and he certainly outran his odds. He ran a very good race behind Citizen Bull in gaming. Chad does well with the new acquisitions, even sort of the horses that have come from overseas. I know he's had that start stateside. He gets blinkers on. There's something about him that I can't put my finger on, that I can't love him unless he's going to be a huge price on the tote board. And I do think he's going to be the wise guy horse. I think he's going to take some respect in here from different crowds, trying to stay away from, say, the 2 and the 7 that will be the short prices. But the other horse that you actually mentioned from a speed perspective, Brodeur, I've actually been impressed with his wins, especially on the stretch out last time out. And maybe the track flattered him a little bit there, but to go from 6 furlongs onto the mud, then to a mile and a 16th on a drier racetrack and be able to prevail, he ran very well. I don't like that his number took a little bit of a backward step in here. That's why I'm going to put him in the defend category. I just don't know if he's as good as those other horses, but I have some curiosity around him. And this has been on the radar for a little bit, that this was going to be the option for him.
Yeah, and as we throw up my grid for this race, I guess I'll first comment on those 2 Chad Brown horses that you were talking about, and I'll kind of work right to left as about the horses that I'm using, because Hill Road was a difficult call for me too. I mean, he did close really well into that slow pace that just totally held together in the Breeders' Cup, and he was the only one that was making up that kind of ground, but he did save a lot of ground around the turns, whereas Chancellor McPatrick was wide. So maybe that's a reason to upgrade Chancellor McPatrick a little bit, even though he didn't finish as strongly as Hill Road did. And I was reading the article that our colleague Dave Grenning wrote about this race, and he had some quotes from Chad Brown. It was saying, I'd love to have 2 more works into Hill Road before running here. And I never love to hear that from a trainer. And you're kind of have your back up against the wall when you get to the second week in March and your horse hasn't run yet. So if they're going to make the Derby with Hill Road, they kind of have to run here. So I wonder if this is just a prep for the next race that they're looking towards down the line. So that's the reason why I put him in the defend category and Chancellor McPatrick in the use category, because I do think Chancellor McPatrick, as you were saying, he's got real talent. We saw it in the Hopeful last year. We saw it in the Champagne. I'm not quite as convinced as you seem to be that 2 turns is ultimately going to be what he wants, because he does seem like he's got that really potent kick around the far turn of his races when he's been successful. And he did not show that around a second bend in the Breeders' Cup, even with the slow pace. I thought he should have done more running in there. So I didn't love that effort. We'll see if the blinkers work for him, but I was kind of on the fence with him. I respect him, but he was in the use category for me. And Ashley, you might remember, we did a video on the Southwest together, and I didn't like Patch Adams at all in that spot. I was all about downgrading him, but in reassessing that race, I don't think it was the plan to have him as far back as he was in the early stages, because it seemed like that start was a mess for everybody. And he was one of the horses that hopped a little bit. Obviously, it wasn't as disastrous as the start that Sandman got, but he was not as aggressively ridden out of the gate after that hop that I think they would have liked for him to be. And he had to settle a little further off the pace. He made a middle move and flattened out. I'm a little concerned about how far he wants to go, but this is just a mile and a 16th again, and he's probably going to get a decent stalking trip. So I thought he was one of the more likely winners, if not the most likely winner in this race. So that's why I put him in the key category. But the horse that I thought was going to offer the best value is the number 5, Filoso. And he's got to prove that he's as good as some of these horses who accomplished more as 2-year-olds. But he closed pretty well in a race that was totally dominated on the front end in that Breeders' Futurity. Now, I know that race has kind of fallen in its stock since then a little bit, with East Avenue and Ferocious not coming back to do much running as 3-year-olds. But I still think Filoso ran well that day, as well as when he broke his maiden at Saratoga. And last time in the Kentucky Jockey Club, that's a trip you might want to go back to watch if you're handicapping the sequence, because he just got an impossible trip and ride that day. He was towards the back behind a slow pace. John Velasquez tried to do something about it, but he ended up making a 5-wide premature move around the far turn and paid the price for it late as he flattened out. He's been working like clockwork steadily up for this race. I like his drills. And I just think he's going to fly under the radar in here at a price. He's 15-1 in the morning line. So he's the one that I really wanted to upgrade that could offer value in the key slot. So that's kind of how I broke them down in here. But I found this to be a difficult race to read. And as we take a look at my final grid for this race, what I'm going to try to do here, is be right about downgrading those Chad Brown horses in the first leg, the Columbia, spread in the 8th race, not really take a strong stand there, but just hope to be right in that allowance optional claimer, and then try to get home that Clement horse that I had an opinion about in the Hillsborough, get through it with Nitrogen, who we both agree is just very much the horse to beat in the Florida Oaks. And then if I can get alive to the 3 horses I have as keys and uses in the Tampa Bay Derby, I'll feel pretty good about it. But I think the beauty of this sequence, key, use, and defend, is you're playing multiple tickets and you're sending most of the money you're investing through your key horses, those that you really like. And those in the defend category, they're just one ticket. They're the backup plan if you're wrong in a race. And you typically are wrong in at least one leg of a pick 5 sequence, because it's really hard to be right about 5 races in a row. Ashley, summarize how you're thinking about playing this sequence.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a great point. You have options here, right? We're not going to go caveman strategy and bet these like we would, right? I'm not going to go 4 deep necessarily in the opener on every ticket, but allows you to play multiple tickets. For me, you can see kind of how I go early. It's typically, there's a horse that I do think is probably a lower price on the morning line, but I also have a price built in as my key horses in those first 3 legs. I think, you went a little bit heavy in the 8th race, and I think that might come back to bite me later, just knowing that it is a race that is not a stakes race. There's a ton of speed in there. They're only going 6 furlongs, but I do think the 8 gets the right setup. And if not, the 12, I think, is maybe, to me, one of the most logical horses in the field to use. We mentioned in race 9, obviously the 8 is going to take so much betting support, but the one's going to be my wild card in there. I know she's going to be cold on the board because of maybe her recent form, but I think there are things that I really liked about her in there. The 6, obviously, another horse that I think is probably a must use in a lot of people's minds. And we talked about it, Nitrogen. I think in terms of likely winners on the card, that is the most likely winner that I could maybe single on most of my tickets. I did have a little bit of a concern, though, about the 7 in there. I like those prices, but the defend horses, if I'm being more realistic, they're probably what I would use in, not sort of these sorts of wagers. I'll play them in the exactas. I'll play them in the tries and maybe try to get some bankroll elsewhere on the program. And then for me, obviously, I do think the main 2 are the 2 horses, the lowest price in the Tampa Bay Derby on the morning line, Chancer McPatrick, as well as the 7, Patch Adams. And I think there are talking points on both of them, as we discussed, David. You could go in one camp, and then you could easily be convinced to be in the other horse's camp. So we'll see if anyone else can score an upset in there, but I do have a feeling it's going to be one of those 2.
Well, everybody, that's how we're playing this Pick 5 sequence at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. But we'd love to know, how are you playing it? Which horses do you agree or disagree with our takes on? Or maybe just put your grid in the comments. We'd love to know how you're going to break down this sequence and how you're thinking about playing it. So definitely continue the conversation. And let us know if you like these types of videos, because we're trying out this new Pick 5 format, and we'd love to hear your feedback about it. So everybody, thanks for tuning in. Good luck if you're playing this Tampa Bay Downs Pick 5 sequence on Saturday.